Salted carrots. Delicious when your city gets blockaded.
Today, this gasometer, turned bunker, turned shelter, turned food storage, may be turned into condominiums. Just another example of the changing face of Berlin. Up next...
So this is the handiwork of the French, right?
Even 50 tons of TNT couldn't destroy this buried piece of Berlin's past.
Hitler's favorite movies were King Kong and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Next stop, Humboldt-Hain Park in East Berlin. Its hilly landscape is a favorite for joggers and tourists who climb to the top to check out the panoramic views. But in Berlin, things aren't always as they seem. This hill wasn't always a hill, and the Nazi fortress peeking out from beneath the soil wasn't always underground. The fortress is called the Flak Tower, and it was one of 3 built in Berlin by the Nazis. It was, and still is, considered a feat of German engineering. At over 140 feet high and separated into 7 levels, the Flak Tower of Humboldt was the perfect vantage point for the Nazis to observe movement of Soviet troops and to fire at Allied planes from anti-aircraft platforms. Built from reinforced concrete, the Flak Tower has 12-foot thick foundations, 8.5-foot thick outside walls, and 5-foot thick interior walls. The roof was 12.5 feet thick. German architects had succeeded in building a bomb-proof building. At the end of the war, Soviet troops had surrounded the Flak Tower and were firing directly at it for 3 days straight, but nothing could bring it down. 3 years after the war ended, the Flak Tower and everything reminiscent of Hitler's military might was ordered to be destroyed. But this was no easy task. Allied French troops tried 3 times with over 50 tons of TNT and only succeeded in crumbling the southeast side. The north side still remains intact, albeit buried beneath the rubble of old Berlin.
So I've noticed there aren't many hills or mountains in Berlin.
There were not many. After the war, we had some more.
There were more after the war, right? Okay, you have to explain that. That's a loaded answer there.
They are artificial, like this one.
This is an artificial mountain.
Oh, yes.
From the rubble of the war.
Yes.
Berlin's landscape is relatively flat, but look at a topographical map and it appears otherwise. That's because the hills you see aren't natural formations. They're made up of debris. The rubble hills were erected in the late 1940s and early 1950s during a massive cleanup by the Allies of war-torn Berlin. Sasha told me that after the war, 80% of the streets in central Berlin were destroyed. That meant the pavement, sidewalks, trees, houses, cars, bus stops, and anything else in the path of Allied bombs would have been in ruins and buried beneath my feet. But I wanted to see for myself. I was about to dig into a hill made of 60 million cubic feet of rubble, a hill built directly on top of the Flak Tower.
So if we dig right here, I'm going to find the ruins of Berlin.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Definitely hit something kind of hard here, right? That didn't take too long, did it? Here's concrete. Here's more. This we don't even have to dig. It's right here at the surface. Look, here you go. This is all from Berlin.
There were layers and layers of history lying just inches beneath our feet.
It's a big mountain. Here, there's more.
Newly constructed 1940s homes were mixed up with Prussian palaces and carted by the truckload to this very spot. Since they couldn't destroy it, the plan of the Allies was to bury any sign of the Nazis' impressive Flak Tower beneath the rubble of war-torn Berlin. The east, west, and south side went off without a hitch. Grass and trees were planted, and the new hill took root. But the north side of the Flak Tower slopes down towards the U-Bahn rail. Piling rubble that would vibrate when the train passed would be far too dangerous, so the north face was left open. And lucky for us, that's how we were going to get in. Sasha and I met up with Reinhard Janik.
This is our expert for today.
A Flak Tower author and expert.
Eric.
Rainer, guten Tag. Thank you very much for meeting with us.
Sasha offered to translate as Reinhard led me through the 7-layered fortress. This concrete structure took only 6 months to build and was braced with steel rods, a technique perfected by the Germans that rendered their bunkers and towers bomb-proof.
My gosh, you know what? If I didn't see how reinforced these stairwells were, this whole building, it would look as if this is made of cardboard and it's all going to come down.
This is the original stairwell.
This is the original stairwell.
104.
What does this say here?
This Turm
Okay, Tower 2.
Yeah, 4th level.
We were on the 4th level of a 7-story building, and yet we were still buried over 60 feet beneath the ground. The top 4 levels were strictly for military use, with observation posts and an anti-aircraft gun platform. Below was a bunker for 35,000 civilians and 2,000 soldiers and their families. The flak tower was so secure, Hitler ordered precious artifacts and artworks once housed in Berlin's museums to be stored here. The flak tower even had its own movie theater.
Like a small town.
It's a small town. This is a fortified village.
The debris from the Allied French attempts to destroy the flak tower was still littered all over the floors.
So this is the handiwork of the French, right? Now we're descending to another level.
Be careful. This is a weapon. It first looks like a pipe, a normal pipe, but this is left from a weapon, an anti-tank weapon, with an explosive head in front, and then it was fired, and what was left was the pipe.
Ah, I see.
It's only for one usage.
Yeah, right. This is only one use. Quite an eerie remnant from this time. This is where you get a sense of the width. How wide from wall to wall?
It's 70 meters.
70 meters wide.
72 meters.
72 meters, okay, danke.
72 meters, or 236 feet, would normally be an easy target. But I was about to see why the flak tower never came down. The French blasts on the southeast side revealed a spider web of steel rebar inside the thick concrete.
Look at this, the reinforced steel, and to me it looks redundant. How much rebar is in this building?
We have in 1 cubic meter of concrete about 50 kilos of steel.
That's 110,000 pounds of steel rebar for every 100 cubic feet of cement. Normal concrete construction today uses approximately 3,300 pounds of steel.
So contemporary buildings will have maybe a third to a quarter of that in a typical building, right?
You're right. Yeah.
Today, the flak tower sits abandoned, 140 feet beneath the rubble of Humboldt-Hain Park. And while Sasha and his group continue to try to piece together its past, exactly what went on inside its walls remains a mystery.
This was a secret building. It was a military building, and so it was in a kind of secret. And we have no original pictures from the inside.
Right, so we have to speculate.
Yes.
Speculation is common in a city like Berlin. A city whose secrets are only now coming to the surface. Up next, the beginnings of Berlin's underworld.
I mean, this is an immense structure. Oh my God! This one is even bigger.
The very first bomb dropped by the Allies on Berlin during World War II killed an elephant in the Berlin Zoo.
Long before the Berlin Wall divided the city and Hitler's delusions nearly destroyed it, Berlin was a cosmopolitan capital. It was known for its liberal subcultures, its good music, and of course, its beer. Today, the beer garden is synonymous with life in Berlin. There's no shortage of them scattered throughout the city. But here, beer is much more than just a cold drink. This concoction of water, malted barley, hops, and yeast is a deep-seated tradition in Germany's history. A tradition that relied on the depths of Berlin's underground.
Hello, Ingmar.
How are you?
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Really nice.
Good. I was expecting you to greet me with beer.
Oh, maybe we have one other beer afterwards.
Excellent.
Ingmar Arnold, an underground specialist and beer connoisseur, was showing me the remains of the Betzel family brewery, located in today's East Berlin. From 1846 to 1948, the Betzel family was the largest private brewery in Berlin. At their height, they produced 120,000 liters of beer and had a subterranean storage capacity of over 40,000 liters at a time. That's over 110,000 bottles of beer brewing underground.
Germans are renowned for their beer making. What do they do better than the rest of the world?
This is a purity law. Just the main basic elements of beer, hop and grain and water, nothing else. He makes the best beer in the world. This is a secret.
The brewers of Berlin wanted to separate their beer brewing techniques from the ones of their Bavarian neighbors to the south. Instead of the age-old ale, they would brew lager. And they needed the cold, damp spaces of the underground to do it. Berlin brewers needed to keep their new revolutionary lager at approximately 32 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 30 days before it was ready to drink. But in 1844, there was no electricity for refrigeration, so necessity became the mother of invention.
They needed to cool the beer, they needed underground, and they found it here. And they could go into the underground and they could cool the beer here. Therefore, the brewers invented the Berlin Underground.
Before there were bunkers, there was beer. And that's not an easy feat in a city whose name means swamp. So how'd they do it? How, long before Hitler built his bunkers, were beer makers able to master the complex digging and pumping techniques necessary to go underground? They didn't. Instead, they found one of the few hills in Berlin, moved their factory on top of it, and dug their cellars more than 80 feet into its dry, rocky soil. There were 15 to 20 rooms, each 20 feet tall and 20 feet wide, tracks for small carts to carry the barrels, and even rooms for the beermeister to test his brew. Before Hitler or the Metro ever broke ground, they had succeeded in creating Berlin's first underground city.
Welcome to the underworld of Berlin.
This is quite a large vault right here, a storage area right here.
They're very, very impressive. More than 20,000 square meters are just lying 20 meters beneath the streets of Berlin.
That's approximately 65 feet beneath the bustling former factory above, and tons of pressure on the cellars below. But these cellars were built to last. Arched ceilings help support the pressure, and the rocky soil it's dug into gives it a sturdy base.
Oh my God! This one is even bigger, right? This is an immense structure. We've got a ceiling that's probably 25 feet high. I'm guessing in the width about 20 feet. And I walk past these and I can see there's other rooms, other chambers, other storage facilities. Look at the size of these. These all would have been filled with beer, right? To the walls, to the ceiling, filled with beer.
Once the lager had cooled for a month, wooden barrels were loaded onto the horses waiting up above to deliver fresh and cold lager to the beer gardens of Berlin. But there was much more than beer drinking going on in the gardens.
Well, beer has, of course, an important function, a cultural function for the self-identifying understanding of Germans, and it played a very important part in politics.
Political parties like the Communists, Social Democrats, and Nazis used the lure of free beer to win votes. And what better platform than at a beer garden, where 200 to 300 citizens gathered each day to have a drink. Hitler even gave his first speech in Munich in a beer garden in 1923. And his architect, Albert Speer, was first introduced to Hitler after a beer garden performance in 1930. Beer halls had given Hitler his rise to fame. Now they'd provide him with the protection he needed to wage war on the world. These same rooms that once stored Betzel's famous beer were turned into a war-making factory in 1939.
They made radar equipment and for the mass communications among the army, because this production was so important. They just took this production site into the underground that it wouldn't be destroyed by the planes.
And how come Betzel was wiped out after the war?
Because after the war, this part became a part of East Berlin, and the Communist Party didn't allow private enterprises like the Betzel Brewery.
It also didn't help that Betzel won the gold medal for beer production during the Nazi regime. This stigma tarnished the legacy of Betzel beer, just as it tarnished the once bright future of Berlin. A madman, a soil full of secrets. In less than 100 years, Berlin went from a swampy Prussian province to the battleground of the 20th century. And its underground all innocently started with beer. Today, a group of modern-day Berliners are adding their own layer to the underground by daring to dig up the secrets of the past. As eyewitnesses die and new construction covers up clues, their job gets harder and harder.
We see the streets and the whole city with other eyes. Others are looking for the clouds and we look for the ground.
But the search has only just begun.
we have worked for generations. There are so many secrets. Our work will be never done.
In less than 10 years, the Berlin Underworlds Association has just barely scratched the surface. 10 years from now, there's no telling what they will have found. Foundations, 8.5-foot thick outside walls, and 5-foot thick interior walls. The roof was 12.5 feet thick. German architects had succeeded in building a bomb-proof building. At the end of the war, Soviet troops had surrounded the flat tower and were firing directly at it for 3 days straight, but nothing could bring it down. 3 years after the war ended, the flat tower and everything reminiscent of Hitler's military might was ordered to be destroyed. But this was no easy task.
Hitler's favorite movies were King Kong and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Next stop, Humboldt-Hain Park in East Berlin. Its hilly landscape is a favorite for joggers and tourists who climb to the top to check out the panoramic views. But in Berlin, things aren't always as they seem. This hill wasn't always a hill, and the Nazi fortress peeking out from beneath the soil.
Salted carrots. Delicious when your city gets blockaded.
Today, this gasometer, turned bunker, turned shelter, turned food storage, may be turned into condominiums. Just another example of the changing face of Berlin. Up next.
So this is the handiwork of the French, right?
Even 50 tons of TNT couldn't destroy this buried piece of Berlin's oil. Wasn't always underground. The fortress is called the Flat Tower, and it was one of 3 built in Berlin by the Nazis. It was, and still is, considered a feat of German engineering. At over 140 feet high and separated into 7 levels, the Flat Tower of Humboldt was the perfect vantage point for the Nazis to observe movement of Soviet troops and to fire at Allied planes from anti-aircraft platforms. Built from reinforced concrete, the Flat Tower has 12-foot thick. French troops tried 3 times with over 50 tons of TNT and only succeeded in crumbling the southeast side. The north side still remains intact, albeit buried beneath the rubble of old Berlin.
So I've noticed there aren't many hills or mountains in Berlin.
There were not many. After the war, we had some more.
There were more after the war, right? Okay, you have to explain that. That's a loaded answer there.
They are artificial, like this one.
This is an artificial mountain.
Oh, yes.
From the rubble of the war.
Yes.